Now, the antiquary, Mr. Somerton, sat hunched over this rather obscure Latin text and read as follows: Verum usque in praesentem diem multa gariunt inter se canonici de abscondito quodam abbatis Tomai Thesaro. His interest was piqued now, and he continued reading. Ipsum enim Tomam ingentem auri messam circa monasterium de Fodiseper hebet, de quo multoties interrogatus ubi esset, cum risu respondera solitus erat, Job, Johannes et Zacharias vel vobis vel posteris indicabunt. Now, this is absolutely fascinating. I must translate it at once. And this is what he came up with. I'm able to quote you now from his own unpublished notes. So, up to the present day, there is much gossip among the canons of Steinfeld Abbey about Abbot Thomas's hidden treasure, for which they have often made a search, though hitherto in vain. The story is that Thomas, while yet in the vigour of life, concealed a large quantity of gold somewhere about the monastery. Often asked where it was, he would always answer with a laugh, "Ha ha! Job, John, and Zechariah will tell either you or your successors." Now, the text went on to list other great works carried out at Steinfeld by this Abbot Thomas, most notably his filling the windows of the church with splendid painted glass, and his restoration of the abbot's lodgings, for which he dug a well which he adorned with beautiful carvings in marble. Now, the passage ended by telling Mr. Somerton what in fact he already knew, namely that Thomas had died suddenly in 1529 at the age of 72. But you see, it was that line about Job, John, and Zechariah that had really snagged his interest. You see, it was Mr. Somerton's particular project at that time to trace the whereabouts of the windows from the Abbey Church at Steinfeld, for in Steinfeld they no longer were. Now, as many of you may well know yourselves, not long after the Revolution, a great deal of painted glass made its way from the dissolved abbeys of Germany to this country. And Steinfeld was among the most considerable of these involuntary contributors to our artistic possession. In fact, glass from the abbey can still be seen to this day adorning many of our parish churches, cathedrals, and private chapels. Now, Steinfeld glass can be relatively easily identified, either by inscriptions upon it, in which the name of the abbey is included, or by the subject of the painted windows, in which a number of well-defined narratives and cycles were represented. Now, it was this passage that I just read to you, however, that had set Mr. Somerton excitedly upon a new identification, because he had recently seen in a private chapel in Hertfordshire 3 large figures, each occupying a light in a single window, and each evidently the work of the same artist. Now, it was clear from the technique that this artist had been a German of the 16th century, and these 3 figures represented, surely I don't need to tell you, the patriarch Job, the evangelist John, and the prophet Zechariah. Now, each of these fellows was depicted holding a scroll or a book on which was inscribed a line from his writings. And Mr. Somerton had been struck from the moment that he first set eyes on these by the curious way in which these painted inscriptions differed from the text of the Latin Bible. So, for instance, on a scroll held by Job, it said, "Auro est locus in quo absconditur." There is a place for gold where it is hidden. Now, the Vulgate should correctly read conflator, where it is refined or where it's purified. On a book held by St. John, there were 2 separate verses from the book of Revelations conflated together. Habent in vestimentis suis scripturam quam nemo novit. They have upon their raiment a writing which no man knoweth. While on the scroll held by Zechariah, it said, super lapidem unum septem oculi sunt. Upon a single stone are 7 eyes, which in fact alone of the 3 inscriptions, unlikely as it may sound, represents an unaltered text. Now, a sad perplexity it had been to our investigator to think why these particular fellows should have been included together in the same window. I mean, there was no obvious connection between them, either symbolic, historic, or doctrinal, and some of them had begun to conclude that they must originally have formed part of a much larger series of saints and prophets that had filled the windows of some capacious German church. But you see, that passage had quite altered his thinking on the subject, because it showed that not only were the names of these 3, Job, John, and Zechariah, constantly on the lips of Abbot Thomas of Steinfeld, but that the same Abbot Thomas had put up some painted windows in his church at around exactly the time that these figures had been painted themselves. Now, it was no very wild conjecture that the figures now in Hertfordshire might have formed part of Abbot Thomas's original scheme, and it was one that could moreover be relatively easily verified or set aside by another careful examination of the glass. And as Mr. Summerton was a man of leisure, he set off without delay on pilgrimage to Lord Dunster's private chapel, where his conjecture was confirmed to the full. You see, not only did the style and technique of these figures chime precisely with the date and the place required, Germany, circa 1520, but in another part of the chapel, he found some more glass that was known to have been brought along with the larger figures, which contained the coat of arms of Abbot Thomas von Eschenhausen of Steinfeld. This, of course, was of no small scholarly interest in itself, of course, but you see, that gossip about the buried treasure kept recurring to Mr. Summerton, and it occurred to him that if Abbot Thomas had meant anything by the teasing answer that he'd given his questioners on the subject, Job, John, and Zechariah shall show either you or your successors, he must have meant that there was a clue to be found in the windows that he'd put up in his abbey church. And so he carefully noted down every possible detail that he could of these painted figures, and returning to his Berkshire manor house, he consumed many a pint of midnight oil in his tracings and sketches, until the day arrived after about 3 weeks, when he summoned his manservant and told him to pack their belongings for a short visit to the continent, whither, for the moment, we shall not follow them. Now, Mr. Gregory, the rector of Parsbury, set out before breakfast to the gateway of his carriage drive to meet the postman and to sniff the cool autumn air. Maybe he was not disappointed of either purpose. And among that morning's budget, there was a letter bearing a foreign postmark addressed to him in an uneducated but plainly English hand. Now, when he opened it, he was surprised to see that this came from the confidential valet of his old friend and squire, Mr. Summerton. Now, I am lucky enough to possess this original document. Mr. Gregory's brother passed it on to me after his death, and I'd like to read it to you. Now, the spelling is unconventional, but I think the sense of it is clear enough. So, honoured sir, as I am in great anxiety about master, I write at his wish to beg you, sir, if you would be so good as step over here. Master has had a nasty shock and keep his bed. I never have known him like this, but no wonder, and nothing will serve but you, sir. Master say, would I mention the short way here is drive to Koblenz and take a trap, hoping I've made all plain, but am much confused in myself, what with anxiety and wakefulness at night. If I might be so bold, sir, it will be a pleasure to see an honest British face among all these foreign ones. I am your obedient servant, William Brown. P.S. The village, or town I will not term it, is named Steinfeld. Well, you can imagine for yourselves the hurry of preparation into which the receipt of a letter like that might thrust quiet Berkshire parsonage in the year of grace 1859. I mean, a train was caught that afternoon to meet the Antwerp boat, which itself arrived in time to make a comfortable connection with the Koblenz train. And from that centre, Mr. Somerton was easily able to secure transit to Steinfeld itself. Now, I must confess here that, in fact, I'm labouring under a great disadvantage as the narrator of this story, in that I've never seen or visited Steinfeld myself, and neither of the principal actors, while they yet lived, were ever able to give me any more than a vague and rather dismal idea of its appearance. I gather that it is a small place with a big church that has largely been despoiled of its ancient fittings. A number of great ruinous buildings, which I must admit I do rather like the sound of, surround this church. But you see, I've never felt that it's really been worth spending any money on a trip. I mean, even though it's undoubtedly more attractive than either Somerton or Gregory ever allowed, I think there's very little of first rate to be seen there, or perhaps there is one thing, and that I should not wish to see. Well, on arriving in Steinfeld, Gregory made his way to the inn where Somerton was lodged, and there he found, pacing outside the front door, pale and distraught, and evidently anything but master of the situation, William Brown. His view of the rector's honest British face caused great relief. "Oh, God! Oh, am I glad to see you, sir? And so will master be too. How is your Master Brown? I came as quickly as I could. Thank you, sir. Thank you. And he's better, but he's had an awful time of it." "Well, what's happened? Has there been an accident?" "Oh gosh, sir, I really don't know how much I should tell you myself. Master was most particular that he should be the one to describe everything to you. But well, there's no bones broke. There's that to be grateful for anyway." "Well, has he seen a doctor?" God, I'm sorry, Brown, but this is all very confusing for me. I know, sir, I know. And I'm sorry." Now that they were outside Somerton's door at this point, and as Brown fumbled with the handle, he was broken off by a sharp cry from within. "Oh, God, who's that? Brown, is that you?" "Yeah, it's only me, sir. It's only me, and I brought Mr. Gregory with me. Oh, thank God. Come in. Please, come in, both of you now." Well, they opened the door. Now, the blinds had been drawn against the light of the afternoon sun, but Gregory saw at once, and with shock, how drawn and how damp with drops of fear was the normally placid countenance of his friend. Somerton leaned up out of the bed towards him, beckoning with a trembling hand, thanking him profusely for coming. Well, I mean, after 5 minutes' conversation, Somerton was more his own man, Brown later reported, than he had been for some days. He was able to eat a respectable supper, and he spoke of being strong enough to set off for Koblenz within 24 hours. But first, Gregory, there's something that I must ask you to do for me. Please don't ask me to go into any details at the moment. I'm not up to that right now. But I can assure you that you run no risk in performing this task. You yourself will be perfectly safe. It's just that I need you to put something back for me. I need you to correct a terrible mistake. Oh, God. I'm sorry, my friend. I'm sorry. Hey, Somerton. Don't worry. Gosh, look, I'm not going to ask for any explanation until you see fit to give it. And if this task that you want me to perform for you is as straightforward as you say, then I shall be happy to do it. First thing in the morning. Thank you, my friend. You don't know how grateful I am to hear that, but now, Brown, did you hear that? Tomorrow morning, you and the rector will go, you know where, and you will put it back. Now, you remember where we left it, don't you? You remember where we left it? Brown swallowed dryly and nodded. Good. And now, Gregory, one more thing. I will be much the more beholden to you if you could refrain from questioning Brown about this. I promise you that tomorrow evening, in 24 hours, if all goes well, I will give you all the explanation you require. But until then, I hope you understand that I simply must try and get some sleep. What? Oh, no, Brown stays here. You sleep in here, don't you, Brown? Yes. What? Yes. Oh, and Gregory, one more thing. I should lock your bedroom door before you go to bed tonight. They like it here, the people at the inn, I mean, and well, it's better for you anyway, I think. Oh, thank you for coming, my friend. It means more to me than you can ever know. Well, yeah, I mean, Gregory went to bed, and if he woke once or twice in the night and fancied that he heard a fumbling sound around the lower part of his door, but that was perhaps no more than what a quiet man plunged into a strange bed in the heart of a mystery might reasonably expect. But at any rate, until his dying day, he asserted that he had heard such a sound several times outside his door between midnight and dawn. But, well, he was up with the sun and out with Brown shortly after that. Now, baffling as was this task that Summit had asked him to perform for him, it was not a difficult or upsetting one, and with 20 minutes of leaving the inn, it was done. Later that morning, the three men set off for Cublenz, and later that evening, as they sat in their inn, Somerton settled down to his promised explanation. Well, I think you already know, old fellow, that I came out here in connection with some painted glass in Lord Dunster's private chapel. Yeah, well, the starting point of the whole business was this. Listen. Verum usque in praesentem diem multa gariant inter se canonici, and here Mr. Somerton went over some ground with which we are already familiar. Now, would you like me to read the Latin to you again? No. Oh, all right. I understand. Well, on my second visit to the chapel, Somerton went on, I made it my business to note down every possible detail of these figures, any lettering, any diamond scratches on the glass, any mark at all, even if it seemed accidental. At first, I decided that I'd apply myself to the painted inscriptions. Now, I couldn't doubt that Job's "there is a place for gold where it is hidden" was some sort of a reference to Abbot Thomas's treasure. So then I decided to look more closely at the book held by St. John. They have upon their raiment a writing which no man knoweth. Well, the question will have occurred to you too, I'm sure, as well. Was there any sort of writing on the robes of the figures? Well, there was nothing that I could see, but you see, each of them did have this rather thick black border to his mantle that made it a conspicuous and rather ugly feature on the window. But anyway, at that time, I was entirely nonplussed. And I think, but for a curious bit of luck, I'd probably have given up the quest at the same point as the canons of Steinfeld had given up before me. But, well, you see, it just so happened that there was an awful lot of dust on the surface of the glass. And dear old Lord Dunster, coming in and seeing my blackened hands, insisted on sending for a Turk's head broom, to clean the surface of the glass down with. He's ever such a nice man. Anyway, I suppose that there must have been a rough strand in this brush, because as it passed over one of these black borders, I saw that it left a long scratch and some yellow stain showed through. Well, I told the fellow with the brush to hold off his work for a moment, and I scuttled up the ladder to take a closer look. And sure enough, there was this yellow stain, and what had come away was this thick black pigment. Now, it was obvious that this had been applied to the glass after it had been fired, because you could scrape it away easily with your fingernail. And anyway, scrape away I did, and you will not believe. No, I'm sorry, my friend, I do you the greatest injustice. I'm sure that you've already guessed. I found beneath it 3 large capital letters in yellow stain on a clear ground. Well, God, I could hardly contain myself. I told Lord Dunster that I thought I might have detected an inscription, and I begged him to allow me to uncover the rest of it. And he was so good about it. He was so relaxed. He told me to do just as I wished, and then rather to my relief, he was required to be elsewhere. Well, anyway, I set about the task, and it wasn't a difficult job at all. I mean, this pigment came away almost at the touch, and I don't think it took me more than 2 hours to get the whole lot clear. And when I had got rid of it, I discovered that, yes, indeed, St. John had been telling the literal truth. Each of these figures had upon his raiment a writing which no man knew. Now, what did this writing say, you ask? Yeah, well, when I was clearing the pigment away, I took pains not to read them, not to read the letters. I'll save it up all for a treat when I got the whole thing done. And when I finally had got it all off, oh gosh, my friend, I could have almost wept from disappointment. Because what I was looking at now was the most hopeless jumble of letters that had ever been shaken up in a hat. Now, I have here a greatly, for me, treasured object. It's a marvellous object. This is Mr. Somerton's notebook. These are the field notes that he made when he was in Lord Dunster's private chapel. And I can now show and read to you exactly what he was presented with at this moment. So on the mantle of Job, it read, Drevicio pedn mom savlizl carvi basba auvd. And on St. John's robe, Redianum lessus podiciest tabas ganur. And on Zechariah's, I mean, it really was absolute gibberish. Well, flat as I felt, someone went on. I mean, my disappointment didn't actually last so long, because it occurred to me that these letters must be some kind of a cipher. I mean, they had to be, didn't they? So I took down very careful notes of what was there, and then I went back to Parsbury to work on the puzzle at my leisure. And God, the pains I went to. And, at first I thought myself terribly clever, and I looked at some of the old books on secret writing. Now the Steganographia of Joachim Trithemius, so that seemed pretty promising, because in fact he was a younger contemporary of Abbot Thomas. Selenius's cryptographia, of course. I even had a look at Bacon's De Augmenti Scientiarum. I know, but I was desperate. And, well, of course they produced nothing. So then I tried the principle of most frequent letter, using first Latin and then German as the basis, and that yielded nothing. And so then I went back to the imagery of the windows and shelves, hoping almost against hope that Abbot Thomas had left some kind of a clue there. I mean, I couldn't make anything of the colours or the patterns on the drapery. There were no subsidiary objects, no background landscapes, nothing in the canopies. The only possible resource seemed to be in the gestures of the figures themselves. And so I went back to my notes. Job, scroll in left hand, forefinger of right hand extended upwards. St. John holds book in left hand, with right hand blesses, 2 fingers extended. And Zechariah, scroll in left hand, right hand extended as Job, but with 3 fingers raised. In other words, Job had 1 finger raised, John 2, and Zechariah 3. Now, might that not be it? I thought, might there not be some kind of numerical key there? And there was, Gregory. That was it. I mean, it took me a while to work it out, but after a few goes, I realized that what you're supposed to do was this. After the first letter, you skipped 1 letter. After the next, you skipped 2. And after the next, you skipped 3. And that gave me this sentence. Decem milia auri reposita sunt in puteo in atrio domus abbatialis de Steinfeld a me Omar qui posui custodiam super air gar aqui latouche. 10,000 pieces of gold are laid up in the well in the court of the abbot's house of Steinfeld by me, Thomas, who has set a guardian over them. Gar qui la touche, the last bit, it's French. It means something like, I don't know, let him beware who touches it. Some sort of family motto, I suppose. Well, I mean, come on, what would you have done? Hey, Gregory? Oh, yeah, of course, stayed at home, yeah. Watered your roses, watched your walnuts grow, or would you have done as I did, hot-footed it to Steinfeld with all the speed you could to trace the mystery literally to the fountainhead? Yeah, well, as you know, I came out here as quickly as the resources of civilization would allow, and I installed myself in that bleak old inn. I mean, even then, I don't deny I wasn't entirely free from forebodings. I mean, on the one hand, of failure. Of course, it occurred to me that this well might have been demolished and built over decades before, or somebody else might have come across the treasure before me quite by chance and made off with it. And yeah, also, I don't deny that I wasn't entirely comfortable about that talk of a guardian standing over the treasure, but I'm not going to go into that until it becomes absolutely necessary. Well, anyway, Brown, we started investigating almost immediately, didn't we? Yeah. I let it be known locally that I was interested in the remains of the abbey, and so we couldn't avoid paying a visit to the church, impatient as I was to be elsewhere. But in fact, actually, it was rather interesting to see the space that these windows had originally been designed for. But no, I mean, the principal object, of course, was to find the abbot's lodgings, and it wasn't difficult. This scruffy little courtyard to the southeast of the church, that was the place. Oh no, well, of course, you saw it yourself this morning, and 3 sides derelict buildings. I was very relieved to see that it wasn't overlooked, and it wasn't too far from the inn either. And then there was that well. I mean, God, that's a remarkable piece of work, isn't it? I think that curb is Italian marble, and I think the carvings are probably Italian too. You saw them, I suppose, the reliefs, Rebecca and Eliezer at the well, Jacob and Rachel. Yeah, very well done, I thought. Anyway, I examined the structure itself with the keenest interest. Square well head open at one end with an arch over the top to hold the wheel through which you thread the rope for the bucket. All seemed to be in very good condition. And then, of course, there was a question of depth and access to the interior. I leaned over and I thought it must be, 60, perhaps 70 feet down. And God, it really was as if Abbot Thomas had wanted to lead his searchers to the very threshold of his treasure house, because, well, as you saw yourself, there were these stones bonded into the masonry at intervals, going down like a sort of a spiral staircase. I mean, it seemed too good to be true. And I wondered if, in fact, this wasn't some trap. These stones were designed to give way when one placed one's weight upon them. But I tried 2 or 3 of them with my stick, and they both held firm. And I reassured myself that the rope that I bought from England would be long enough for the job, and that the wheel was strong enough to hold it. And so I decided that Brown and I would make an attempt that evening. We went back to the inn for dinner. Over the food, I had a little cautious conversation with the landlord, made sure that he wouldn't be too surprised if we went out for a walk at about 9 o'clock. I didn't mention the well, of course. And, oh, my God. Oh, my friend. Now we come to the crisis. And even though I hate to even think about it, I think it's probably just as well if I tell it you exactly as it happened. Well, it wasn't it, Brad? It was about 9 o'clock when we set off. We had the rope and the crowbar in an old carpet bag, and we attracted no notice. In fact, I told the landlord of the inn that I was going to go out and make a sketch of the abbey by moonlight. God help me. And anyway, within 5 minutes, we were at the well. Now, at first, I just sat on the edge of the well head, observing, making sure there was no one else around, nobody spying on us. But no, I mean, the only noise we could hear was some horses chomping on grass in a field somewhere out of sight. We were perfectly unobserved, and the light of a gorgeous full moon allowed us to thread the rope safely through the wheel. I seconded of it around my body below the arms and tied the other end to a ring in the masonry. Brown, you were behind me with a lantern. I had the crowbar. And so we began our descent. I mean, cautiously at first, of course, testing every step before we put any weight on it, and constantly scanning the walls for any sign of any mark or sign. Half aloud, I counted these steps as we went down, and it wasn't until I'd reached the 38th that I noticed anything like an irregularity on the surface of the stonework. But even then, you see, it didn't seem to be a deliberate mark. I began to feel very flat, to wonder if, in fact, Abbot Thomas's riddle was all just some elaborate hoax. When we got to the 42nd step, the staircase ceased, and it was with a very heavy heart that I began to retrace my steps. But you see, I stopped again on that 38th step, and I just examined very carefully this imperfection in the stonework. It just seemed to me that the texture of it seemed to be, smoother than that around it. And I wondered if perhaps it might be cement rather than stone. So I gave it a whack with my crowbar, and there was a distinctly hollow sound. Well, you were halfway down a well. Of course, there was a hollow sound, you'd say, but no, there was more than that. You see, after I'd given it this whack, this great flake of cement fell down and landed on the step at my feet, and I could see that beneath it, the stone was marked. I had got him, Gregory! I had tracked him down! Abbot Thomas, the riddling, teasing, smart aleck of an abbot. I had won the game. Even now I think of it with a certain pride. I didn't waste any time. I cleared away enough of the cement to see that it covered this large block of stone, about 2 foot square, that was marked with a cross. Now, slight disappointment again, but only for a minute. It was you, Brown, who reassured me. Do you remember what you said? That's a funny looking cross, you said. It looks like a bunch of eyes. I snatched the lantern out of your hand, and sure enough, the cross was constructed of eyes. 5 in a vertical column, 1 on either side, 7 eyes. Zechariah's inscription had been explained. This was his stone with 7 eyes. Well, I cleared away all the cement around it, and I gave it a prise on the right with my crowbar, and you see, it moved easily. I saw that it was simply a thin, light slab that I could easily lift out myself, and that it concealed the entrance to a cavity. So I lifted it out. I put it on the step at my feet, and then I just stepped aside and waited for a minute. Well, no, I can't tell you exactly what for, but, well, just in case some terrible thing rushed out, but it didn't. So after a moment, I lit a candle, and I put it in the entrance to see if there was any foul air, and also to get an idea of what might be inside. Now, it was clear that there was some foulness in the air, because the flame guttered for a few moments, but then it began to glow steadily, and I could see that this cavity went back some distance, widened out on either side, and contained these light-coloured rounded objects, which looked like bags. Well, what was the point in waiting? I squared up to the hole, took a breath, and thrust in my right arm. Oh, God, Brown, get me a drink. Will you please get me a drink now, Brown? Thank you. Well, I felt to the right with my hand, and it came into contact with something rounded. It felt more like leather than anything else, slightly damp, and it was evidently part of some full, heavy thing. So I put in my other hand, I got a grip on it, and I started pulling it towards me. It was heavy, but it moved much more easily than I'd expected. Now, at this point, I'm afraid, I accidentally knocked down the candle with my right elbow, and at exactly the same moment, Brown let out a cry and started running up the steps. I looked up, and I saw him climb over the well at the top and disappear with the lantern. So I was left in darkness. Anyway, I kept on pulling the heavy thing towards me. I got it to the front of the cavity. It hung for a moment on the edge. Then it fell upon my chest. and put its arms around my neck. Oh, I tell you now, Gregory, I'm acquainted with the extremity of terror that a man can endure without losing his mind. I was conscious of the most ghastly smell of mould, of this smooth face moving wetly over my cheeks and mouth and neck, of several, I don't know how many arms or legs or tentacles twisted about me. I cried out, how did you put it, Brown? Like a pig. Yeah, and I'd stepped back into nothingness. I mean, mercifully, the rope around me held, and Brown was able to pull me back to the top. I don't know how you did that, Brown. You are a very strong man. You know that. You are a very strong man. Well, somehow he got me back to the end. I mean, Brown doesn't speak any German, of course, and I was in no way of talking. But the next morning, I told the innkeeper that I'd had a fall in the Abbey ruins, and I suppose that he must have believed me. But before I go on, I want you now to hear what Brown's experience was during those awful moments. Brown, tell the rector, tell him exactly what you told me. Oh, well, all right, sir. Well, I was standing on the step above the master with the lantern. He had his arm in the hole when I suddenly thought I heard something fall into the water below from above. So I look up and I see that there's this head looking down upon us from the opening to the well. Well, I suppose I must have said something. I start walking up the stairs, holding the lantern in front of me, and it illuminates this face, sir. Oh, God. Now, that was a bad one. That is as ugly a face as I ever see. You know, horrible eyes, his nose and cheeks all caved in. An old man it was, nasty teeth. But what really made me angry, sir, was that he seemed to be laughing at us. So I ran up to the top, I climb over the edge, I look around, and there's no one there. Now, that is a big courtyard, sir. It was too big for anyone to run in time to one of the buildings at the edge of it, still less an old fellow. So I look around the edge of the well to see if there's anyone kneeling there, and then I hear the master cry out, and I'm sorry, sir, you did. You sounded like a pig. All right, Brown. Thank you. I've already said that. So, what do you think, Gregory? Gregory? Oh, I see. All right, then. Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think the fellow who'd set the trap had come back to see it sprung. I think that ugly, laughing old man that Brown saw was Abbot Thomas, and ever since then, it's been absolutely awful. You know, each night I'm convinced that there's something watching my door from the outside. Sometimes I even imagine there's two of them. I mean, and it's not just the noises that I hear all through the dark hours. It's the smell. It's a ghastly smell of mould. I mean, every rag of clothing I had on me that night, I stripped off, and Brown took it away and burnt it, and yet still the smell remains, and it comes from outside the door. But then, you see, when the sun rises, it dissipates, and the noises stop then too. And that leads me to think that they are creatures of darkness only, and that they have no power during the daytime, and that if I could just get that stone put back on the hole, then, well, I hope. Oh, but there we are. Well, anyway, that's my story. And whether you believe me or not, there's nothing I can do about it. Oh, my dear Sergeant, said Gregory. Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, yet I saw the well, climbed down the stone and the hole. And I agree. I thought that I saw something inside. But Somerton, to me, they look like bags. Well, I only had a brief look. And in your favour, I will say this, that last night, I rather thought that my door was being watched too. Well, I dare say it was, old fellow. I dare say it was, and if so, then I'm most sincerely sorry. But you see, I hope. Well, you know what I hope. But listen, tell me, do you have anything to add? Anything that happened to you in that dreadful place? Well, no, I mean, very little. I mean, Brown and I, we managed to get the stone put back very easily. He secured it with the wedges and the pegs that you've given him. We smeared the surface with mud to make it blend in with the stone around it. And there was something that I think you missed because you didn't mention it before. There was another carving on the wellhead. Another carving. Yeah, yes, rather grotesque actually. It was a sort of horrible creature, more like a toad than anything else, but with elements of a spider to it, I thought. Please stop. All right, but there was something else that you also missed. Another inscription beside it. What did it say? Well, I mean, it was very simple. Latin, again, just 3 words. In aeternum custodiam. Oh, hell. No. What's it mean? Said Brown. What's it mean? In aeternum custodiam. It means, my dear friend, I will keep watch forever. Ah. Oh, yeah. Ah. Boy.